everyone. My name is Greg Leparati. I'm Associate Director of Alumni Relations here at Baruch. Pleasure to have you here with us this evening. This is yet another of our financial literacy webinars with Alan Chen. Very excited to be having another one. I hope everyone's doing well. I know seasons are changing, starting to get hot out there, so hope everyone's enjoying the upgraded weather. I am Zooming from Queens. Feel free to put in the chat where you're Zooming from. It's been great to have alumni be part of these events from all over the city, all over the country, even all over the world. We had some events where Australian alumni were joining us, which was pretty cool. So welcome everyone, great to have you. A little housekeeping, we will be recording this session, so if that's always the #1 question I get during these, we will share the recording after the event. So if you miss anything, don't worry about it. We will send that out. I also ask that everyone please mute their microphones. You can keep your videos on. It's great to see our alumni smiling faces, but mute your microphone just in case any ambient noises distract us. Throughout the presentation, please direct your questions to the chat. Alan is great at answering those questions, mostly in real time, but if anything slips through the cracks, there will be time at the end to have a dedicated Q&A. So don't worry about it if we don't get to your question right away. We will have time for it. Now I'd like to introduce Alan Chen. Alan has been doing these financial literacy workshops with us for quite a while. He's an alum of Macaulay Honors College at Baruch College. You know, you would think that after attending a business school, Alan would know how to manage his own personal finances, but what he found after graduating from Baruch is he actually didn't quite know what to do with all the money he was now earning from his first full-time job. And he sort of realized that there's a gap there in financial literacy for a lot of people, especially from his background and a low income immigrant family background. A lot of this stuff is sort of acquired knowledge through families and generations. So it's something that Alan sort of had to figure out on his own. And his goal now is to share that knowledge with other Baruch alumni. We're very glad he wants to do that. So without further ado, I give you Alan Chen. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Greg. I always appreciate the introduction. My name's Alan. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and also the workshop that we're doing today. So negotiating compensation. It's one of the most popular and exciting topics for many reasons, right? Who doesn't want more money, right? That's why we're all here trying to negotiate a better compensation. So just a quick few more introductions about myself, right? Greg already mentioned low income, non-English speaking immigrant parents. You know, generally speaking, my parents were risk adverse. That also translates to negotiating. When I told them the first time I negotiated, they absolutely did not like that. They were like, why are you taking all that risk? What if you lose your job, right? Like, why would you want to go ahead and negotiate? I think it's, you know, you want to be your self-advocate. You want to get more money, especially if it's money that you deserve, right? So it's very important to put yourself out there and put yourself out there in a way that makes the most sense, right? For the first 4 years of my career, I was a direct report. So I negotiated from the side of just asking my manager for more money. For the past year, I've been a manager myself. So I sort of have the other point of view, right? How does the budget work? Other people coming to me to negotiate. And then when I see them make a mistake, I'm like, why'd you tell me that, right? Why'd you go about that way? But, you know, very important to, you know, share those views and what I think about negotiating, and hopefully provide more insight into that. Every year I've negotiated my salary. The increases ranged from 5 to 30%, depending on the year and how well the economy was doing, right? We're still limited by how much money is in the budget, but that's the key thing, right? Generally speaking, there's almost always money in the budget, right? Everyone's situation is different, but there's some flexibility somewhere, right? Depending on how you want to approach it. All right, quick disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor, and I'm not your financial advisor, which is the most important thing. And so if you're looking for information that requires a licensed professional, definitely seek one out. This is purely for educational purposes, and hopefully we will learn quite a bit about negotiating. All right, before I jump right into it, curious from the chat, who does have experience negotiating their salary? Just because you don't succeed doesn't mean you don't have experience, right? Attempts count as well. So So let me know in chat. So I'm just curious who has negotiated before. Awesome. A lot of people negotiated. So that's great to hear. Hopefully, all of you have your own point of view on negotiating as well. It can provide context for those of us who are a little bit more nervous, who haven't negotiated, right? Just sort of accepted our inflation adjusted raises every year, right? Which could be some of us, and that's fine, right? This is why we're here to sort of help each other out to get more money. So what is negotiating for folks who aren't, really in the weeds all the time negotiating? Generally speaking, you do this like once, twice a year, right? Whenever it comes time for compensation, then you forget all about it. I can tell you upfront right now, it's awkward, right? It's always awkward to talk about money. I'll get to that question in a little bit after I get through the slide. Compensation here is really anything of value to you, right? Including vacation days, salaries, benefits, and so on. We'll speak more about that. And the first thing you really need to do is information, right? Gather information. Information is power. If you understand where the company needs you or your manager needs you, right? What's your leverage? You understand that. And that will tell you exactly, hey, how much can I negotiate for? If you understand salary bands, right? It's all about understanding what exactly, what information is available to you in terms of what can you negotiate for and how much to push for. Right? So those are very key points. There's generally speaking going to be an upper limit for many companies, right? And you have to, the more you understand what the upper limit is, the better it is for you, right? And there's multiple ways to gather that information, which we will talk about as well. And then once you have the information, you have to apply the leverage, right? You have to engage in these awkward conversations that are sort of a little bit nerve-wracking, right? So what are some conversation tactics that you can use? Generally speaking, there's a couple of things that you can say that aren't too crazy. You can be succinct about it, and it will be a quick 15-minute conversation, I promise you. And then your manager will be on on their way to fight for a higher salary for you, hopefully, right? So question in chat, what if I already negotiated last year? Can I do this again this year if I'm not satisfied with the raise? Yes, I negotiate every year, minimum, if not every 6 months, right? I'm always campaigning for yourself, campaigning for myself, and you should be campaigning for yourself as well, right? Just getting out there, and it helps if you prime your manager for it, right? So if I get a raise and I'm not happy with it, I let it be known to my manager that this raise I'm thankful, but it's not substantial enough, right? So that they know next time it comes around, right, you're going to be asking for that raise. The idea is that you want your manager to be nervous about this conversation, more nervous than you would be about this conversation, because they know you're already going in there asking for more money, right? And that's fine. It's really about understanding, hey, what are the expectations and what have you set? If you said that you're happy about your raise, that's a little more trickier, right? You can still talk about it, still bring it up again, but your manager has assumed that you might not want more money, right? The earlier you talk about it and the earlier you tackle it, the earlier you prime those conversations, the better it is. What if it says not in your budget, but you have, we'll talk about that in a little bit. I think we'll cover that part in a little bit. And it's really about talking about the value that you bring to the company, which is a huge part in this. All right. So big thing here, negotiate in good faith. I can't tell you how many times someone said, what if I just lied to the recruiter and manager? And you can, I wouldn't recommend it, right? Personally, I think you should negotiate in good faith, and so should the recruiter and your manager negotiate in good faith, right? You don't want to make up offers that don't exist unless you don't want the job or the raise, right? Because it's a risky move, because if you make up an offer and your company cannot match that offer, you're expected to walk away, right? Because you're not satisfied with what they're offering, so you're going to walk away. And that's understood by both parties. If you make up something that doesn't exist, you actually can't walk away, because you have to accept the fact that, hey, I have to stay. Right. So if you can't match the offer, sometimes it's not the recruiter's or manager's fault. Right. There is a budget that they need to work with. I know that managers, recruiters seem like the people that are holding all the money. And I can tell you, as a manager, I don't hold all the money. but I will give you as much money from the company's wallet as possible. But sometimes there are forces outside of our control, right? A good manager will fight as much as they can for you, and they will let it be known. That's something to be aware of, right? So, but make sure that they're coming at good faith when it comes to that, right? When a recruiter are upfront about salary ranges, this is very important because New York City is transparent about the salary ranges right now. If you're not okay with it, do not continue to interview because now you're just wasting everyone's time, right? Because if your intention is to get the offer and then renegotiate a higher number without new information, it's a waste of time. And for example, if the higher number, for example, at the beginning of the interview, if the range was 75 to 90K, and you said you're fine with it, don't ask for 100K at the end of the interview process once you get your offer. It doesn't look good. You're just wasting everyone's time. In another situation, if you find out during the interview that the position's responsibilities have been underestimated for the compensation, right? There's actually a lot more work. Then yes, you have a case. You should be upfront and ask for more money and make it clear and known. And if you're doing it as a burner interview, it doesn't matter. That's like completely different, right? It's all about negotiating good faith, right? New information is a reason to renegotiate, including what folks mentioned before. What if you bring a lot of money to the company? That's new information. You should renegotiate and you should bring that up. All right, let's walk through some of these questions actually. So what if they say it's not in the budget, but you have personally brought in more revenue for them than your goal? Then the big question is, are there performance-based bonuses, right? If there aren't, why not? Right, that's a question for your manager and company to figure out, understand. And then there's the idea of, if you aren't happy with it and you've brought them the numbers and you've shown them the numbers, it's important to recognize that, hey, if it's not in the budget, what is in the budget, right? Because if you bought $1 million or like $100,000, how come you can't get a cut of that? Like, I don't understand. Ask your manager to explain that logic to you, because if they can't, then it's signaling that you're not valuable to the team, right? No matter how much money you bring in, it's a signal to you. It's unfortunate, but it's still a signal that you should, understand and be aware of, right? And then you can make a decision of if you want to stay at that company who doesn't value you, even though you are bringing in a lot of money for them, or if there's another place out there that does value the money that you bring in and the work that you do. Yeah, so we should be honest about that, and we should be able to confront our managers about that as well. With the current market conditions, would negotiating risk being listed for the next round of layoffs? If I've learned anything about layoffs as a manager and as an employee who's been through 2 rounds of layoffs now in my company, it's that it doesn't matter, because if they're going to lay you off, they're going to lay you off anyway. No amount of negotiating, not asking for money is preventing you from getting laid off, right? At the end of the day, you're just a number, and to the company, so you're just a number, right? Maybe not to your manager, but to your company, you're just a number. So while you are not being laid off, you would want to get as much money as possible before they do a layoff, right? That's how I think about it, because I have no control over the layoffs, who gets laid off and how that works, right? If the company's not doing well, they're going to lay off. It doesn't really matter if you ask for more money or if you're getting paid less, right? If you're getting paid so little that they can afford to keep you, that's a different situation altogether. Maybe you should find a better paying job, right? So there's a lot of, factors going to that, but I don't think that worrying about the next round of layoffs is the best, because there's always going to be a next round of layoffs. That's how economies work. They're cyclical in that nature. You can't always be worrying about the next round of layoffs. Then you wouldn't be prioritizing yourself and your family when it comes to compensation increases. Is it better to negotiate directly with HR to not sour the working relationship with your manager? I, as a manager, would prefer if you talk to me about your compensation increases and not HR. It is one of those situations where you don't want to go over your manager's head, because it may seem like you're not souring the working relationship with your manager, but in actuality, if you go to HR for a compensation increase, you are. And HR, we'll talk more about HR in a little bit, but they're not on your side because they work for the company. Your manager potentially can be on your side. A good manager would fight for more money for you, right? If you deserve it. A bad manager would not, right? It's as simple as that. It's pretty black and white in that regard. Or they will be honest with you on why, right? Why they can't get you more money, and then you can use that information as you wish. What if they say you were bought in as an incumbent rate and raises are dictated by the union basically and nothing can be done? I work in city government. Yes, here that's a big one. In these conversations, whenever you're in a public position and the union's involved, it's harder to negotiate, right? And some of this stuff might not apply to you because of how it's structured. So I can't say I have a lot of good information here for those specific situations because unions tend to negotiate as groups. If you're not happy with the group, then that's something that you should talk to the union about, and maybe they'll fight for you. But if not, there is always the option of entering private sector, which generally will pay higher. And well, you'll lose out on some benefits if you really do the math, but that's something to consider, right? But it may vary from industry to industry. That's something to keep in mind. But it's definitely more difficult to negotiate unless you have everyone on board for those situations. Okay, I'm gonna move up. I'm gonna keep moving a little bit and then come back to these questions. Here we go. All right, tools for doing research. Everyone should be checking out these tools whenever, every 6 months at least, right? When you are talking about salary and compensations, because inflation happens, inflation gets really bad sometimes. For the past 2 years, it's been really bad. You want to have an understanding of where do you stand on average and median when it comes to your salary and compensation. And so these are great websites to check out: Glassdoor, PayScale, Levels, FYI, Blind. All of these great sites to check out for salary on your own company and with others in the industry, right? And for your role. So this is part of doing research, understanding, hey, if I'm being paid below average in New York City, why, right? Why is that the case? Are you being compensated in other ways like bonuses, equities, and so on? Or are they just taking advantage of you, right? So it's really important to understand where you are when it comes to these compensation levels, right? In these bands. Comprehensive.io, great tool, relatively new, came out of the pay transparency laws for New York City, and also I believe that's Colorado as well. So you can see here that there is a bunch of data here just to describe, hey, they posted their job listings and they have a salary associated with it. So what's realistic, right? I will acknowledge that this law does nothing for people who are happy with where they are and their position is not posted online, because it's still a black box, right? You don't see exactly how much you're getting paid in that role if it's not posted online. So, but for everyone else, if you're looking, great place to check out and great place to understand, hey, what are other companies saying? What are their ranges, right? And it's very public information and it's very helpful to understand where you stand, where you might be compared to your current role. All right, salary questions. Let's talk about this one. I'm sure all of us have heard the salary question at some point, pre this law, post this law. They'll ask it in different ways, right? They'll ask stuff like, what salary are you looking for, right? And really these questions are sort of to set expectations for both sides, right? And generally speaking, I prefer never to answer these questions, right? Because you basically don't have enough information to do so. Right? If you give a number that's too high, HR will stop the interview because it's a waste of time for everyone. If you say a number that's too low, HR will lowball you and give you that exact number. And you have absolutely no knowledge if there is more money in the budget or not. Right? I can guarantee you that most folks at the company don't know what the budget is. So it's very much, hey, you don't have enough information and they're not willing to share information. Right? You can ask about it, right? And most companies are required to post them now, which are the salary ranges for New York City and other these locations that have these transparency laws. But once you have that range, right, you want to understand, hey, is that the actual range or is there flexibility? right? You can still pose the question, right? Is that range set in stone or is there flexibility, right? They'll ask you if you're happy with that range, and you'll want to answer that question very carefully, right? Because if you're happy with it and you're not happy with it, then you're just wasting everyone's time because you don't actually want the job because they're not paying you what you want, right? If it is a job that you really want and the range is below what you expected, be honest, be upfront about it. Ask them, hey, is there flexibility for this range, right? And then go from there, right? It's really understanding what the budget is and the flexibility associated with it. It's not about you giving a number out and telling them that you're happy with this number. All right, let's take a little break with these questions here. What if your company has a company-wide percentage cap? For example, they say no employees will get more than a 3% raise. That sounds like a terrible policy. As a manager, I'll be very angry about that policy because that's just going to encourage people to leave the company because 3% is barely inflation. It's not inflation nowadays, right? I would be very disappointed at that. And I'd be curious what your manager thinks about that as well, because it's not a good retention policy. You're basically encouraging people to leave for a higher paying job, right? I'd be curious to know if that 3% raise cap is just because we're in hard, difficult times now, or if it's like all the time, like this is just 3%, like it doesn't go above that, right? Or if there's other compensation, right? Is there bonuses or something like that to make up for it, right? But 3% it's bad. I can tell you that. For long-term employees making a lateral move internally, who are already at the top of the pay band, what are some tips for negotiating? Good question. I moved laterally in my company as well. And ideally, when you move laterally, you want to move to a position that has a higher pay band, right, along with it. So if you're at the top of the pay band, it's difficult to have wiggle room there. And really, it's about asking your manager, hey, what are opportunities of growth for me, right? In other words, growth is usually equal to more compensation, right? No company is going to encourage you to grow without giving you more money, right? So what is your incentive to grow, right? And it's a question I'd be curious to hear what your manager has to say about that, right? Like if I'm at the top of the band, where can I go? Am I supposed to be just happy with the money I'm getting? The answer is no. You're not supposed to be just happy with the money you're getting, right? Because you deserve more as you acquire more skills and become more valuable to the company. So the TLDR for that is that you can talk about moving to a position of a higher pay band or about how those pay bands can change and evolve over time. Right? And it can be an exception just for you, right? You would want to understand where your manager stands in that regard. But in my experience, there's flexibility, right? It all comes down to how much flexibility your manager is willing to go. How far your manager is willing to go to get that flexibility from HR. When negotiating during interview process, why would you present your range above range that they provided? Is 25, 50K too much more? I think it depends on industry, right? In terms of like how much more you can ask for that range. I think that do research with those salary or those compensation websites, figure out what's average. If they're giving a really low range, you should give one that's at least average for the industry. If they give really a high range, then there might not be as much wiggle room, but it doesn't hurt to ask anyway, right? You're at the beginning of the interview. It's just HR. What's the worst that can happen? That you don't get to the interview at all? Like you have nothing to lose, basically. But you want to understand how much you can get, right? So I think it depends on where you are in regards to your industry. Nonprofit, yes, nonprofits are a little bit difficult. They generally speaking do have caps, right? So in that case, I think that where you're coming from is that not all nonprofits are created equal. They all pay different varying amounts, right? So if you really think that you deserve more and your nonprofit is not paying you enough, you can always move to a different nonprofit that will pay more. right? I don't think that cap is true for all nonprofits. I definitely think it's more true than for-profit companies. I've seen friends who work in nonprofit, they went to six-figure salaries by just moving around, right? The longer you stay at a nonprofit, like any other company, the less you will get in raises over time, right? Unless you really hardball negotiate constantly, which is an option, right? If a company is outside New York but is hiring remote employees, are they required to post salary info? I believe. I think it's tricky. I've seen both. I don't know the actual terminology. Remember, the compliance rate is 70%, right? So not everyone's doing it, but it's something that it's more than before, right? It's more information than before, right? I can't tell you exactly yes or no, but I've seen both. If that helps, right? I've seen companies in New York City. I've seen companies outside New York City hiring remote. Some companies post it, some companies don't, right? I don't think there's a hard rule that everyone's strictly following, as you can see with the same 70%. Okay, I'm gonna take a pause and go along these slides and come back to these questions. Okay, here's a big one that I think got brought up a little bit. Risk of losing your job or your job offer kind of goes back to what my parents tell me all the time. Don't fight for more money, you'll lose your job. Hasn't happened to me yet, and I've asked every year. So that's a lesson for anything. It's only one data point. But again, right, this can't happen, right? It's a real concern that people have, and losing your job can happen. It's just extremely unlikely to happen because you're expensive. If you work at your current company and you've been there for years now, the company's invested in you. They've trained you. If they hire outside, it's going to cost them more money. It's always going to cost them more money to hire a new employee versus just keeping the current one and giving them a raise. Right? So you're expensive. There's no harm in asking. If you got the job offer, chances are you're also expensive because it means you're the best candidate in line for that offer. As a manager, I can tell you I hate interviewing. I hate having to redo an interview because HR couldn't give me the money that I needed to hire the employee, right? I've seen some managers just constantly never-ending interviews because they're like, HR won't give me a bigger budget. And I'm like, hey, that's a real problem. But in all situations, the employee walked away, right? We never withdrew the offer, right? So that's something to keep in mind because they're so invested in you already. You've went for multiple rounds of interviews, and that's expensive to have employees interview you. That's time off the job to, basically interview you, walk you through certain systems and so on. I would think if you do lose your job or your offer, it's a red flag, right? If they don't want to talk about money now, they're not going to want to talk about it in 6 months, right? And if they're not going to want to talk about 6 months, then eventually at some point you'll be underpaid, right? Now, do you really want to be working at a place where you're underpaid? Or maybe, right? But I think for most of us, maybe not. For most of us, I think we want to be compensated for what we deserve based on our skill set and our abilities. But at the end of the day, negotiating is risky. I'm not going to say that, hey, there's no consequences. Just be prepared to walk away if that's the case, right? I think that it's less likely if you're at your current job and you ask your current, manager about it, right? Chances are they're not going to just kick you to the side and say, hey, no money for you. They might say no, or there's no budget. Or economic conditions, something like that. That sounds like BS to everyone involved, but it's something that that's possible, right? Ultimately, you negotiate, and you want to be aware of that fact. All right, HR was mentioned a couple of times in the chat. Let's talk about it a little bit. HR is your frenemy, right? For all the HR folks on the call, nothing against you. I work with HR too as a manager. But HR can be tough because remember, HR looks out for the company, right? And rightfully so. They're hired to do so, right? That's their entire job, to look out for the company. It's not to look out for you, right? We shouldn't confuse human resources with that just because humans in the word of it. Their goal is, as any goal, is to make sure that the company continues to sustain with or without you. Right? If you're lucky and they need you, they're going to fight hard for you, right? And that's something to be aware of. So they can be on your side. They can be friends. It just depends on where you stand. The big thing here is that everything should be in writing. Whenever you talk to HR, email follow-ups, if they say something on the phone, they say the offer on the phone, follow up, make sure you get it all in writing, because if it's not in writing, it's not real. It doesn't exist, right? It's like who said, she said, right? Which isn't helpful. And, it's important to understand that, you want to give them a reason, right? Give them hope to fight for you, right? When you're on the phone with HR, you got the interview, you got the offer, or you're fighting for salary. Well, you're fighting for salary because you're going for your manager. But if you're on the phone with HR, you want to give them a reason to go to bat for you, right? You should remind them of your value, what you bring to the company, right? If you know that joining this company is going to save the company XYZ amount of money, bring it up again. It's important, right? Because that's a reason for HR to go to bat for you, right? You want to remind HR why the team decided you were the right choice. And constantly reminding them, constantly telling them, hey, there's hope. I love the company. It's just the money, you're just not giving me enough money, right? As long as that's the only reason, and they understand the value you bring, there's some wiggle room, right? They'll go to bat, they'll find out, and it's about opening a dialogue with HR rather than shutting them out. And then that should give you a good idea about what they'll get you, right? It'll take a day or two, but eventually you'll get hopefully higher numbers, right? Okay, I'll do a couple more slides and now take another look at those chats. Okay, so this is an interesting point that gets brought up a lot. Time is money, but it's also pressure, right? We've seen this a lot. I hate it when they do this, but when you get your offer, recruiters will use time to pressure you. They'll say something like, you have 72 hours to decide if you want this offer or not. I'm like, this is a life-changing decision. I have 72 hours to decide. How am I supposed to decide, right? It's a terrible practice. It puts unnecessary pressure on you. And it's unfortunately becoming more common, right? I see this a lot. And it's not fun, right? Generally speaking, it's 72 hours is barely enough time to get anything done. And especially if you're interviewing with other companies, you're not going to finish all your interviews in 72 hours. This is not going to happen, right? If you have like multiple interviews going, it's going to take much longer than that. But here's where you shouldn't be afraid to push back, right? If 72 hours is not going to work for you, tell the recruiter, right? Tell them, hey, I'm interviewing with other companies, and you want to let them know that they're not the only option on the table. And if they rush you, they're going to lose you, right? Because there's always going to be a better offer out there. Everyone understands there's always going to be a better offer out there. And you want to have as much information as you can to make said offer. Obviously, they want you to stop interviewing and just accept them. But that's where you push back, right? And make sure that once you do that, you also have to communicate urgency to your other interviews. Tell them, hey, I got an offer. Can we speed this up? I can't wait another week for XYZ person to come back from vacation. I don't got time for that. You want to start speeding up the interview, right? Communicate urgency. And the last point here is a little trickier, waiting until the last day. Preferably, I like to do this just because it puts, it gives me more power and puts pressure on the hiring manager and HR. And basically, if you wait until the last day, you can possibly say things like, hey, if I get XYZ, I'll sign tonight. Right? If you're only asking for $10,000 more and then you'll sign tonight, that's music to their ears. They don't want to drag it out or wait forever, right? So if you wait, you'll have a better idea about all the offers you will get, and be able to negotiate back and forth on that, right? Basically, you want companies to fight each other for you, which can happen, right? But you just have to line up the offers so that it makes sense, right? And be able to put pressure on the hiring managers and the recruiters. All right, if you have trouble putting pressure on it, don't worry, just use your family card. Just tell them that, you actually don't wear the pants in the relationship, right? You can't make decisions by yourself. You have to involve a third party, right? You're not the decision maker, right? And the family card can be anyone, your SO, siblings, parents, You just need to tell HR, hey, I need to talk to my family about this. 72 hours is not going to cut it. A weekend is not enough to talk to my spouse about this, right? But remember to tell HR that you love them, right? You love the company, you love the team. Thank them for their time. We really appreciate it. But one thing I found is that HR never tells me, hey, I don't care about your family. Forget your family. Just tell me you want it or not. I've never encountered that, and I've never seen it whenever I interview and get the offer. Um, they'll usually give me the time, right? Or they give a day or two push, maybe not the most time in the world, but generally speaking, if they respect you and they understand where you're coming from, they'll give you the time that you need, right? And we'll have to make time for family when we're on the job anyway. So this is also a good test for them. Do they actually care about the time they spend on the job? Do they want you in the office all the time, right? You understand how much flexibility they have, right? So it's a great way to buy time, just because no one's gonna be mean about this. It's kind of a weird way to do it, but it's worked generally for me, and I think other folks should try it as well. All righty, I'll run for this one and take a look at some of those questions in the chat. So this is a big one. You need leverage, right? Leverage can be a lot of things. And the only reason that I ever got my largest raises was because I came to the table with a counter offer from another company, right? Or even, just coming to the table and explaining the value that you bring to the company, right? If you brought in $1 million in the last quarter, you're valuable. No one's going to argue you're not valuable, right? And that's leverage, right? It's understanding the value you bring to the company. It's going to be leverage, right? And then once you sort of have that leverage, right, there's a specific way of going about talking to your manager or your recruiter, right? You just need to communicate 3 things here, right? You love the company, the team, remind them of your unique value. You brought $1 million, so the time to mention it, right? Tell them you received a higher offer, right? List out the terms of that offer. And then you tell them that the urgency is high, like you need an answer, preferably by end of day, right? Hopefully you told them at the morning. And then, you send your manager off, the recruiter off, and they'll figure it out, right? If they can't compete the offer, then, you didn't want to work there anyway. If they can, great. Now you have more money and everyone wins, right? It's also important to never talk negatively about your current company, right? Because if you like your current company and you want to stay, but you just don't, you're not getting paid enough and you want to explore other opportunities, don't trash talk your current company. Because if you do, then everything you talk about the benefits of your current company as it relates to the new offer won't apply, right? They'll know, HR will know, or recruiting manager will know, hey, they're trying to get out of there. Let's just give them as little as possible, right? Because we want a bigger budget for everything else we want to do. So definitely don't bring up your current company in negative light. You can do so after you get the job, right? It doesn't matter after that. But before, you want to own, remember, information is power. If you give the information, you're losing out on that leverage yourself. All right. What if you get a job offer and don't have the exact experience on the JD? Should you ask for the lower end of the salary range? For instance, they require 5 years of experience in a particular area and I have 2 years of experience. Never ask for the lower range on the salary range. There's no reason to, right? If they offer you in the middle, higher, right? I can definitely tell you that no one's gonna look at you and be like, they're getting paid 50K instead of 80K, so let's give them less work. You get the same work at 50 and 80K. You might as well get paid more, right? Salary transparency is a funny thing in the corporate world, in the sense that basically your manager knows about it and no one else. But as far as I can tell, I haven't seen folks distribute work based on your salary, right, or your expertise. And you'll hear a lot of people talk about this, but how much you get paid is not reflective of your abilities, right? It's the only thing it's reflective of is your negotiating abilities, right? If you're good at your job, it doesn't mean you'll get paid more, right? So, and the corresponding is true. If you're bad at your job, it doesn't mean you'll get paid less, right? So if that's the case, you might as well ask for as much money as possible. Don't try to go for the lower end of the range. That won't help you or anyone, right? It will just make you unhappy, and it will probably worse off for you in the long run, right? The lower you start in the range, the less money you'll make over time, right? It's very important to start higher up on the range. Was told before annual review that there are no promotions or raises at this time, but also found that I am making 10 to 5K less than newer people in the department, even though I've been the longest everyone at my level. I hate to hear it. I hate to hear that. And because it's happened to me before too, right? And in my experience, if you're a manager, maybe it's just me, right? If you're really loud and annoying as a manager, so your directors and VPs, you can get some wiggle room, right? It doesn't have to be money; it can be other things, right? It can be equity, right? Things that may not translate directly to a dollar value immediately, but it's something better than nothing, right? And in my experience, if your manager is loud and annoying enough, as I was for my department, you can get something, right? So when people say it's impossible, I don't know how true that is. In my experience, I feel like if they really value you, then they can push. I've seen some people say their hands are tied. In my opinion, that's just them not being afraid to be annoying. But sometimes it pays to be annoying, right? So it's something to consider, right? But I do agree if you're getting paid less than 10 to 15K, that new people in the department, that's a real problem. That's an actual real problem. And if I was your manager, I would be very concerned about if you're staying, right? Like what's the reason to stay if they're getting paid so much less than the new hires, right? And as someone mentioned, move on. They cannot match. Yes, that's something that can happen, right? And I would still bring it up with your manager, right, tactfully, right, in case that if you like where you're working, maybe they'll match, right? I can't say for absolute sure that they won't, unless you've tried, right? So that's something to consider as well. Yes, there's a lot of things going on where they're like, hey, no raises, no promotions. It's been a year. It's been a year for that. Should I accept a counter offer from my current employer if I'm offered a higher salary somewhere else? If your justification was just to leverage higher pay, you may need to repeat the same process next time. Yes. I think it depends, right? Some people are like, hey, I get a higher pay. They counter offered at my current job. It's higher. Are they trying to replace me? Depends on the company culture, right? Some companies, even though they offer higher pay, they may still be thinking about how to replace you, right? It's all about understanding their current culture, right? If you think that's the culture, then obviously don't stay, right? Because they're just going to replace you and just go to the higher job elsewhere, right? That's like the safest option, in my opinion. But I've counter offered and I stayed at my company, right? And no one's fired me yet, so I'm still there. So I want to say it's an absolute truth that if you get a counter offer and you stay, they're just looking to kick you out. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, right? It depends on the current culture of that company. Sometimes the range is higher for different locations. Is that right? Yeah. Some companies do it, some companies don't. When you're interviewing for that company, you should ask about location-based compensation, right? Most companies tend to, because that's an excuse to pay you less, right? And companies who don't tend to be very open about it. Like it's all over their career site. It's like, hey, we don't do location-based pay, and we pay like San Francisco pay or something. It's always something high, like some high cost of living city. But it's definitely something that you should ask your manager or your recruiter when you interview, right? Especially if moving is a possibility in your future. All right, next question seems great for this next topic is coming up. PTO, negotiate everything. Start time, pay time off, parental leave. As you become more senior, maybe you want to negotiate team, project responsibilities, right? Maybe you don't want to stay in office all the time, every time, or maybe you do, right? And it's all about understanding what you're looking for, and those are opportunities to negotiate, right? And then for the base of everything is salary, equity, bonus, stipends, right? We all deserve more money, so we should all ask for more money. And that's sort of like the most obvious one to go for. Someone asked, can I ask for more PTO instead of higher salary? If I'm in a large company, it seems like the PTO policy might be set and unmovable, but wanted to hear your thoughts on it. Yes, I would say I've asked for PTOs during interviews, more PTOs, and I've encountered generally what you're speaking about. If it's a larger company, they're more set, and they're trying to have more equitable or fair practices when it comes to more visible compensation like PTO, not so much for salary because it's not visible, so they don't need to be equitable about it or fair about it. But it's definitely more difficult to ask for PTOs. Not to say that it can't happen, right? I've seen people who kind of under the table PTOs if they have a good relationship with their manager. But obviously, it's more difficult to make it like consistent every year, right? So larger companies tend to not allow it, but startups more flexibility, right? Small companies more flexibility, but it doesn't hurt to ask, right? I ask all the time, can you give more PTO if you can't give salary, right? Because that's still value. And it's also important to understand what that PTO is doing. If that PTO doesn't stack, it doesn't carry over, or it just expires at the end of the year, that's also not a good a good use of PTO, right? So it's definitely worth asking, but I've encountered them not offering it, depending on the size of the company. All right, so yes, folks, I didn't mention before, but I do run a YouTube channel where I talk about personal finance. And one topic that we see alluded to in the chat was how to talk to your coworkers about salary compensation. Some folks mention, hey, I get paid less than the starting entry. You found that out probably by talking to your coworkers, and you should, right? Everyone should talk to other people about money and how much they make, because that's the only way you'll have an understanding and an idea about if you're being paid fairly, right? That's the only way you understand, hey, what's the high end, what's the low end, and then what's in the middle, and where are you in all of that, right? And it's about being comfortable sharing. Not everyone's comfortable sharing. I acknowledge that, and I'll talk more about it in the video. I'm not gonna play it now, but I will share all this out so you can take a look as well. But it's very valuable that you talk to your coworkers about compensation, right? Because that's information that'll level set you. Like I said before, you don't know what the salary bands are at your current company, right? And if they're not in New York City or one of the salary transparency cities, and they don't post a job posting for your exact title, you're not going to know, and no one's inclined to share it with you, right? So that's something to be aware of, that you sort of have to gather this information, right, by talking to people, being comfortable talking about this topic. It's awkward. I'll admit it's awkward, but it gets better as you keep bringing it up over and over. Obviously, if people don't feel comfortable, then it's kind of like that's harder, right? So you want to definitely build some rapport before you go and ask this question. Okay, we're nearing the end. If you take anything away from this negotiating workshop, research the compensation for your role. Right, I listed out a bunch of sites. Do your research. Understand where you are on average for your city and your role and the band. Right, pick a target compensation. Right, you have to have a number you're happy with. You can't just be like, I want as much money as possible, right? Because then you just never stop interviewing. You just be in the cycle over and over, right? So pick a realistic target compensation and go for that, right? If you land higher, great, fantastic. If you land lower, keep interviewing, right? Keep going at it. But this will help you level set so that when you go into those conversations with recruiters, HR, or your manager, they can't pressure you into accepting a lower number, because you already know what number you want, right? You already know, hey, I want this number and I'm not going to budge from it, right? So it's about setting goals for yourself so that you sort of steal your mentality so that their conversation tactics don't work on you. And understand the value you bring to your company, right? A lot of people in the chat have mentioned they bring a lot of value to their company, right? Understand it as they do, how much value they bring to the company, how much revenue they bring to the company. Right? Do your best to, right? Because that'll help you interview both at other companies and help you argue for your own salary increase, right, or compensation increase with your own manager. The fourth one, some people do it, some people don't. I like to do it, right? Write a script and practice the conversation. Right? I have, for every one of my negotiating conversations, I have a script. Right? It doesn't go exactly as I plan it to go, but it's better than nothing. And it's talking points of anything, right? Notes for me to reference as I have that conversation. And if you're on Zoom, even easier, right? You just have it pulled up next to you and you just talk about it. If you're in person, maybe a little more difficult. Study it before you go in, right? But it shouldn't be too crazy. And lastly, schedule some time with your recruiter, your manager, have those conversations, talk about it, right? Prime them early on. Hey, not happy with my compensation. Great. What are you looking for? I want 20K more. That'll make me happy. There's no money in the budget. Great. What can I do to get there? Can't be done? Okay, I'll leave, right? If it can't be done, great. How can I go about it? Right. So it's about having those conversations and priming them early on so they can prepare for that. All right. I have financial literacy coaching sessions, right? They're free 30-minute sessions to me to talk about your financial situation, answer questions. It goes to teach you how to find information that you need. Right? They're always going to be free. It's not a trick to, first 30 minutes is free, then the next 30 minutes, like, I'm going to charge you money for it. The only challenge is finding schedule on my calendar, right? So what is this? This is May. So there's some time in May and June and so on. But, definitely check that out. I will share the link in the chat as well for anyone that wants to sign up. Got this. And there's an email as well. If you have questions, you don't want to chat, on Zoom or on the phone, feel free to shoot me an email as well. And there's also my YouTube channel that I have there. So, as is custom, I must ask people to subscribe and like to all my videos because that's how I get more subscribers as I go through this. But yeah, let me take a look at some of these questions and we can have some conversations while we're going through this. Greg, is there anything you want to chat about before we dig into these questions?
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. Another great presentation. Really enjoyed this. Thanks to everyone for their questions and engagement this evening. We'll get to some more questions in just a bit, and feel free to direct any more questions to the chat. We do have a few more minutes to answer some, and we've got a few we will get to. But thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate this. We're gonna, as Alan has here in the slides, next workshop, TBD. We do hope to have some more workshops planned for you soon, and we'll share news about that as soon as we can. And thank you again, Alan. It's been a great year of doing more of these events with you, and really appreciate it. But that being said, I think we can take a look at the at some of the chat questions and see what else we have in store here. And yes, just to reiterate, we will be sharing the recording and the slides afterwards. So don't worry about that. We will send that.
Awesome. Yeah, someone asked, isn't there a new law in Europe that requires employers to show the salary ranges? Yes, for job postings, not for if you're already working at a company. They're not required to give you a salary range for existing workers, right? So only if they hire for your position, which might not be a good sign, depending on how many positions you have in your company, then will you know what those ranges are, right? But also, it doesn't prevent you from just asking your manager, about the ranges. They may not know, but it doesn't hurt to ask it. What's my salary range for my position, right? It's also understanding how much growth there is for me. If there's no growth for you, then you might want to consider either maybe it's time for a promotion or maybe it's time to go somewhere else, right?
Also, if you work for a public institution, a state, for example, it's oftentimes possible to look up salaries online. There are usually publicly accessible databases that have this type of stuff. So that's another resource to look at if you want to look for maybe comparable salaries, etc. One place to look.
Definitely. I'm sure a lot of us on the call have looked up our professor's salary before. It's all public information. So, so I agree with Greg. So if you work in the public sector or with government, definitely take a look, right? Just a quick Google search away. Can you share some talking points for how to deflect questions about desired salary? Yeah. So funny story, when I was interviewing previously, a recruiter asked me 3 times in the same phone call what what salary I want to get paid. And they're very persistent about it. They'll say stuff like, what salary you're looking for this position. And I would say, right now I'm just looking to get a better understanding of the team's responsibilities and my role before I can give you an answer. And they'll say, like, if you had to come up with a number, what would it be? Right. And I will basically more or less repeat that. And then they'll hit you with the system requires me to put in a number before we move on with this interview process. At that point, I would say, that's fine, put in 1, right? Because realistically speaking, you're not going to get paid $1. They legally can't do that. But if it allows the system to move on, then that's fine, right? And ultimately, normally if they put the pressure on, I normally say something like, "Hey, recruiter person, I don't have. You probably have a better idea about what the salary ranges are for your company than I do, and you're more well equipped to answer that question. Currently, I don't have a good understanding of my responsibilities yet until I speak to the team. So maybe we can revisit this question after those conversations with the team, right? It's how I'd approach it. Basically, you want to delay, right? Because you don't have enough information. You want to be upfront about the fact that you don't have information. Right? Put the ball back in their field. There's no reason you need to answer the question. And usually when they ask you, you can end the conversation real quickly if you just ask them, what is your salary range for your company, right? And they'll give it to you, and then they'll ask the question, are you happy with that? And then it becomes a whole different thing. Now you're working for range instead of I want like 50K or something like that, right? And you're working with a range where you have more information versus the other way around, where you give a range and then you don't have enough information anymore. I negotiated with HR in September. They told me to wait for the end of year raise. When's a good time to touch on the subject again? This time with my manager, not HR. Yes. So I would say talk to your manager about it. And if you talk to HR, they might just deflect you back to your manager at the end of the day because they have like a process, if you will, that you have to go through. When's a good time to ask? Well, what is the end of year for your company, right? Depending on when that is. Personally, I like to, as a manager, I would like to know 3-4 months ahead of time so I can prep, right? So I can gather documents, so I can sing your praises as a direct report, so I can justify that increase, right? But I would talk to your manager, right? Preference-wise, like it's never too early to broach the topic or bring it up and just say, hey, when I was hired, HR said that I wanted for more money. They mentioned that year end raise was a good time to ask. And you want to bring the topic up, prime them for it, right? And also ask them about how realistic it is, right? Because just because HR said so doesn't mean that it's actually going to happen, right? What it means is that there's a possibility. If your manager all of a sudden said, hey, you have to be with the company for 1 year before you can get a raise, well, that's a bummer. Unless you got that in writing from HR that you would get a raise by the end of the year, it's a little tricky, right? So find out earlier on, and then work with your manager for the best time and approach and what needs to get done to get that raise, right? I'm glad everyone loves the presentation. I'm very happy that I'm helping folks.
Fantastic presentation, Alan. I would also say, as some additional advice, I would recommend everybody stay somewhat active on LinkedIn. And this goes back to sort of the leverage situation, which Alan talked about. Leverage is obviously very important in these types of conversations. But I found that if you maintain an active LinkedIn, and you don't have to be posting or constantly messaging people, but just keeping your profession up to date with your responsibilities can really go a long way, because people will find you, potential employers, recruiters, they'll reach out to you. And just being armed with that information of people reaching out to you, recruiters trying to recruit you for various jobs, knowing what those salary ranges are, et cetera, that can be really helpful for you as you go into these types of conversations for leverage, to know your worth, to know what you could command, et cetera. That's just one thing I wanted to throw out there. Yeah.
That's a huge one. Remember, just because you talk to recruiters and have the initial phone call, you're not obligated to continue an interview. Just like how they're not obligated to do so either, right? So if you're just there for gathering information, have at it, right? You should get as much information as you can, like Greg mentioned. Are prospective employees allowed to ask your previous employer how much money you made? I'm pretty sure it's illegal, right? But it might vary state to state, or like the particularities might vary. But even if it wasn't illegal, you don't have to share it. Just say, I don't feel comfortable sharing that number with you, right? And they move on, right? Why would HR want to make you uncomfortable? If they do, maybe you don't want to work at that company, right? So you definitely don't have to share that information. But that also doesn't, just because it's illegal doesn't stop HR from asking anyway, right? Is what I've noticed. So, stand your ground. You're in the right there.
I also want to echo what Alan said previously about when you're having these conversations, and if, for example, they don't want to reach the number you want to get to or the promotion you want, having those conversations to say, well, what will it take to get me there type of thing. Those types of conversations are really important. And Alan mentioned that. But just be open, and honest with your manager about, this is what you want to reach and how can you get there, and sort of put that plan in process, just so it's out there, so it's clear what your intentions are, what you're looking for, and what you can try to do to achieve that. That's also really important to get where you want to get.
Yeah, definitely. It never hurts to give your manager a little bit of a stress, make them a little bit nervous, that you want more money. And then they're like, are you thinking about leaving? Like, I kind of want them to stay. So what should I do? Right. As a manager, I'd be concerned if you're so happy you're not even asking for money. I'm like, why not? Like, have you given up hope? You don't want to stay here anymore. But yeah. All right, cool.
Well, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Thank you again, Alan. This was a fantastic presentation. We will send out the recording and other information shortly after this. So we hope to see you at some future events, and we will share some details about upcoming financial literacy webinars as soon as we finalize them. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Alan. I'll leave you for the final word, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. I appreciate it. I appreciate everyone for coming, and happy negotiating. If you ever have trouble negotiating, I'll be sharing out my contact details. Feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to talk through, talk through it, and also work on a script if you need it. Happy to help. And good luck.
Thank you, everyone. Hope everyone has a great rest of your evening. Hope to see you soon. Thank you again. Have a great night. Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.